I was standing in Linda Farrow's HR office staring at a promotion letter without a signature. My name, my new title, my raise. It was all printed in black ink, but the signature line was blank, like the future I'd been promised had been quietly erased. I'm Jordan Hale, 44 Senior Project Strategist at Bridgemont Strategies. 17 years of my life had gone into building client accounts and systems that kept this firm's $12 million contract steady. I thought this letter meant my work had finally spoken louder than office politics. Turns out it didn't. Linda kept her voice careful, as if she was reading from a script. Jordan, the division director, decided we are holding off on promotions this quarter. Division director, that was Evan Mercer, my boss. The man who had told me just 3 months ago, "You're next in line." 17 years in, and I was still learning that promises in this building expired the second they were inconvenient. Before I tell you what I did next, do me a favor. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had a boss tell you you're next in line and then hand your future to someone else. I didn't storm out. That's not my style. Instead, I left Linda's office holding the letter that was never signed. It felt heavier than it should have, as if all the late nights, the travel, the weekends I missed with friends were stuffed between those pages. Back at my desk, Carla Nguyen from accounts messaged me, "You okay? Carla's been here almost as long as I have." She'd heard the whispers Evan pushing for a fresh leadership approach, which in our world meant someone cheaper, younger, and more willing to smile through bad ideas. The sting wasn't just the promotion. Evan had set me up as the safe pair of hands for Redwood Dynamics, one of our biggest accounts. I'd shepherded their expansion project through 2 regulatory changes and a vendor collapse. Derek Cole, their VP, trusted me enough to loop me in on deals before his own board. That kind of trust doesn't show up in quarterly reports. I'd been here before, watching someone with less time in the trenches get fast-tracked because it suited somebody's agenda. But this time was different. This time, I had options. Evan didn't know Derek had been asking me about my long-term goals. He didn't know I'd been keeping a quiet record of who really kept Redwood's projects moving when deadlines slipped. And he certainly didn't know that the client relationship he was about to gamble with could be the same one that unraveled his leverage over me. By the end of that week, I'd decided 2 things. I wasn't going to fight for the title Evan refused to sign off on, and I wasn't going to warn him about the fallout, because sometimes the best way to get even isn't to win the promotion. It's to let them realize too late what they lost. Evan had no idea the same client he counted as his safety net would be the one to put me in a position he couldn't ignore. By the time Evan Mercer shut the conference room door, the air in there felt heavier than it had any right to be. It wasn't the kind of meeting you could walk into blind. I'd already seen the signs, the way his emails got shorter, the way Linda Farrow's calendar suddenly included my name in 15-minute process check-ins, the way Carla Nguyen had pulled me aside the day before and said, "Whatever they tell you, just keep your voice calm." Evan didn't bother with small talk. He slid a folder across the table like it was evidence. "The committee's decided you're not the right fit for the senior strategy lead role at this time. No, we appreciate your contributions. No, let's revisit this in 6 months. Just a verdict, clean and surgical." I flipped the folder open. Inside was the HR-issued promotion letter on Bridgemont Strategies letter, had my name in bold, unsigned. Linda must have typed this up before the decision shifted. The date in the corner was last week. I looked up at Evan. "So this was ready to go until—" "What exactly?" He leaned back. "The role requires a fresh perspective. You've been here. What, 17 years? We need someone who can think differently." I thought about the clients I'd brought in, the budgets I'd balanced, the late nights when the lights in the building were down to just mine. I thought about the fact that the only other candidate had been in Evan's division for 18 months. "You mean someone who owes you?" I said quietly. Evan's jaw tightened. "This isn't personal, Jordan. It's about the company's direction." But it was personal. You don't hand someone a letter like that and pretend it's about a compass heading. You do it because somewhere along the line, they became inconvenient. I slid the letter back into the folder, closed it, and rested my hands on top. "Noted," I said, my voice steady. "Let's see how that direction works out for you." What I didn't say was that direction ran straight through Redwood Dynamics, one of our top clients, and one where Derek Cole, their VP, had been hinting for months that I should keep my options open. At that moment, I didn't know if I'd take him up on it, but I did know the unsigned letter wasn't going in the trash. It was going in my desk drawer, and it would stay there until it was useful. By the time the conference room emptied, I'd already folded the unsigned promotion letter twice and slid it into the inside pocket of my blazer. Not because I thought Evan Mercer would change his mind, but because I wanted the weight of it there, pressing against my ribs, a quiet reminder that the rules here weren't written for me. I walked past Marcia Vance's office on my way back to my floor. The door was closed, blinds tilted. I could see her outline through the glass phone, pressed to her ear, one hand scribbling notes. She rarely intervened unless a client threatened to walk, and I doubted Evan's little power play would rise to her level, at least not yet. Carla Nguyen caught up with me near the elevator. I heard she said quietly, eyes scanning the hallway like we were discussing trade secrets. In a way, we were. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. Instead, she slipped a slim manila folder into my hand. Inside was the latest status report from Redwood Dynamics Unofficial, and more revealing than anything in our internal briefings. "They're unhappy," Carla murmured. "And it's not about us, it's about him." She didn't have to say Evan's name. His fingerprints were all over the delays, the scope changes, the missed check-ins. Back at my desk, I read the report twice. Derek Cole's name appeared in nearly every email chain. We'd worked together for years. He knew my work ethic, my precision. If Redwood Dynamics was restless, Derek was the kind of person who might be quietly looking for a lever. I set the folder beside my monitor and opened the Bridgemont project schedule. One of Evan's changes, a reallocation of senior analysts, had already pushed the Redwood deliverables into dangerous territory. On paper, it looked like a minor slip. In practice, I knew it would force them into a high penalty clause if not corrected. Evan, of course, had built himself an escape hatch by assigning the blame downstream. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the office around me. This was the kind of opening you didn't advertise. You watched, you waited, you learned which wires to pull and when. That evening, as the building emptied, I stayed late not to catch up on work, but to draft a private note to Derek. Not an offer, not a complaint, just a single carefully worded question. If you were steering the next phase, what would you do differently? I didn't hit send, not yet. Timing mattered, and for the first time all day, I felt the quiet shift of control, like a piece on the chessboard had just moved without Evan noticing. The unsigned promotion letter sat in the center of my desk, like a dare I wasn't supposed to take. The envelope was still sealed, but I'd already read its contents thanks to Linda Farrow's awkward delivery that morning. She'd explained in that careful HR tone that Evan Mercer had decided to revisit the promotion process in the next cycle, which in Bridgemont language meant never. 17 years at Bridgemont Strategies, and I was now holding a document that promised the role I had already earned, minus the signature that made it real. By 2:15 p.m., I'd made my decision. The letter stayed on the desk, a silent witness, while I packed the essentials into my leather satchel. Laptop project binders, a small photo of Carla Nguyen and me at a client conference in Chicago, and one fountain pen I refused to leave behind. I wasn't walking out, not yet. But I was no longer playing the game Evan had set up. The call came as I was tightening the strap on my bag. My desk phone flashed Redwood Dynamics. External line. Redwood Dynamics wasn't just any account, they were the account. $12 million a year in consulting and strategy work. And I'd been their primary contact for 8 years through 4 CEOs, 2 mergers, and 1 scandal that could have ended their European operations if I hadn't stepped in. I picked up on the second ring. "Jordan Hale," I said, keeping my voice level. "Jordan." "It's Derek Cole," came the reply. His voice was tight but controlled the way it always was when something was wrong, and he didn't want the whole building to hear it. "Derek." "What's going on? Is Evan in your office?" he asked. "No, just me." "Good. Then I'll be blunt. We just got off a call with your CEO, Marcia Vance, right? She says you won't be leading the Q4 integration project. She says Evan's assigning it to someone else." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of his words pressing against the bitter taste already in my mouth from this morning. "Did she say who?" "Some name I didn't recognize," Derek said. "But here's the thing, Jordan, I told her, we're not moving forward without you. This isn't a request. It's non-negotiable." The silence stretched for a beat. I could picture Derek in his glass-walled office at Redwood Tie, loosened one hand gripping the edge of his desk. He wasn't the kind of client who made idle threats. "Derek," I began. "No, listen. We've been through acquisitions market collapses and a dozen board shakeups together. You know our systems better than half my executive team. I'm not trusting this integration to a stranger Evan drags in to make himself look decisive. He stopped, his voice dropping a notch. What's going on over there? For a moment, I thought about telling him everything. The unsigned letter, Linda's awkward delivery, the months of watching Evan position himself to take credit for work he didn't understand. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, let's just say there are internal politics at play. That's their problem, Derek said. My problem is getting this integration right. And if Bridgemont can't guarantee you're running, Point Redwood will find someone who can. Officially. I heard the unspoken part. And that someone might not be inside Bridgemont. I swiveled in my chair, my eyes landing on the promotion letter. The promotion letter that was never signed, an empty promise, a symbol of what Evan thought he could control. What's your timeline, I asked. Board meetings in 2 weeks, Derek said. We need to finalize leadership by then. 2 weeks. That was enough time to make decisions that would echo for years. I'll see what I can do, I said. You'll do more than that, Derek replied. Call me tomorrow, and Jordan. Whatever's happening there, don't let them sideline you. You're too valuable for that. The line clicked dead. I stayed in my office another 30 minutes staring at that letter. Every part of me wanted to march into Evan's office and drop it on his desk with a single question. Why? But this wasn't the time for confrontation. This was the time for leverage. Carla Nguyen appeared in my doorway just before 3:02 coffees in hand. She handed me one and leaned against the frame. You look like you're about to move to another continent, she said. I took the coffee, grateful for the warmth in my hands. Derek called. Redwood's threatening to walk if I'm not on the integration project. Carla's eyebrows rose. That's not something Evan can ignore. Or Marcia? Maybe. But you know Evan, he'll spin it as Redwood being unreasonable. Carla sipped her coffee. So, what's your move? I glanced at the letter on my desk. I'm not sure yet, but I know this Evan just handed me more leverage in one afternoon than I've had in the past year, and I'm going to use it. Carla smiled, slow and deliberate. That's the Jordan I know. By the time I left the office that night, the city was awash in the orange glow of streetlights. The letter stayed in my bag, pressed between my laptop and the Chicago conference photo. It wasn't over. Not even close. In the reflection of the building's glass doors, I saw myself for what I was: not a sideline strategist, not a forgotten 17-year veteran, but someone holding the thread that kept $12 million in revenue from slipping away. And tomorrow, I was going to start pulling it. The unsigned promotion letter sat in the top drawer of my desk, tucked under a stack of quarterly reports. I hadn't touched it in days, but I could feel its presence every time I opened the drawer for something else. It wasn't just paper, it was proof. Proof that I'd been promised something and that Evan Mercer had decided I didn't deserve it. That morning, Carla Nguyen stopped by my office with 2 coffees and the kind of look you only give a friend who's walking a tightrope without a net. He's scheduling a private review with Marcia Vance next week, she said, sliding 1 coffee toward me. He's spinning the team reorganization line hard. Wants to move some of your accounts to Trevor Klein. I didn't bother hiding my smirk. The guy who thought Redwood Dynamics was in the aerospace sector. Carla's lips pressed into a thin line. He's setting the stage, Jordan. If Redwood's contract gets reassigned, that's $12 million off your plate and your leverage. It was exactly what I'd been expecting. Evan didn't just want me passed over for the promotion. He wanted me neutralized. And in Bridgemont Strategies' world, client portfolios were power. Take away my biggest one, and suddenly my 17 years looked like a lucky run instead of a track record. I thought back to the day Linda Farrow had handed me that promotion letter, unsigned, her eyes darting toward Evan's office as if she were passing contraband. The weight of it in my hand had been the opposite of what I'd expected, not accomplishment warning. Evan's memo hit inboxes the next morning, temporary account transitions for operational efficiency. Trevor's name sat under Redwood Dynamics in neat bullet points. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I called Derek Cole at Redwood. Hypothetical for you, I said, leaning back in my chair. If your primary contact here were shuffled, would that change your renewal plans? He didn't hesitate. Jordan, I told you 2 years ago, Redwood stays because you know our systems better than we do. You disappear. We rebid the contract. Period. That was all I needed. One clean sentence that could pull the rug out from under Evan's whole maneuver. I didn't even have to threaten it, just let gravity do the work. But before I could move, Carla messaged me a screenshot. It was from Evan's Slack to Marcia Cole's, loyalty is to Jordan. Need to phase them out of the Redwood account quietly. The timestamp was 20 minutes old. For a moment, the edges of my vision went white. It wasn't just strategy, it was personal now. I printed the screenshot and slipped it into the same drawer as the unsigned letter. Evidence was starting to stack up. 2 days later, Marcia called me into her office. The view of the city behind her was sharp and clinical, like everything else about her. Evan was already there, arms crossed, wearing that polite half smile that meant he thought he'd already won. Jordan Marcia began Evans proposed some account adjustments to balance workloads. I understand Redwood would move to Trevor. I kept my voice calm. I'd caution against that. Redwood has been clear any change in lead contact triggers a contract review. They've hinted that renewal would be unlikely. Evan jumped in. Jordan's overstating it. Redwood's loyalty is to Bridgemont, not to individuals. I opened my folder and laid Derek's email on the table, the one with the line, "If Jordan leaves our account, we rebid immediately." Silence stretched across the room. Marcia read the line twice. Then she looked at Evan. "We can't afford to lose Redwood this quarter." His jaw tightened. Then perhaps Jordan should focus solely on that account and step back from other strategic duties. It was a transparent demotion dressed as specialization. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the flicker of real anger, not the slow burn I'd been carrying, but a spark that lit everything up. I met Marcia's eyes. "That's not the only concern on your desk. You might want to review Evan's internal correspondence about phasing clients out without their consent." I slid the printed Slack message across to her. Some of us still think ethics matter here. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the smallest shift in her posture and acknowledgement. She gathered the papers without looking at Evan. I walked out of that meeting knowing the temperature in the building had changed. Before I tell you how Redwood became the lever that turned everything, take a second and tell me, have you ever watched someone underestimate you so badly, they handed you the exact tool to beat them? Hit like and subscribe if you know exactly what that feels like. That night, I took the promotion letter out of the drawer for the first time in weeks. The paper felt thinner now, less like a promise broken and more like a placeholder for something bigger. I wasn't after Evan's approval anymore. I was after position the kind you didn't need someone else to sign off on. The next morning, I sent Derek a simple update status change pending. We'll confirm before month end. He replied within minutes, "We're with you whatever you decide." And that was the moment I knew the rest of the story wouldn't be about whether Evan could push me out. It would be about how far I could make him fall. I sat in the glass-walled conference room, watching Evan Mercer skim the quarterly metrics like he was searching for a reason to dismiss them. Across the table, Carla Nguyen was presenting the Redwood Dynamics renewal report numbers I'd spent 3 weekends refining when Evan's eyes drifted to his phone. Let's not get lost in the weeds, he cut in. The renewal will happen if we keep things steady. No need to overcomplicate it. I wanted to ask if $12 million a year was his idea of steady. Instead, I kept my voice level. Redwood has flagged gaps in the last 2 deliverables, I said. Derek Cole made it clear they expect an assurance plan or they'll reevaluate the contract. Evan didn't look up. Then make sure your replacement gets that message. The word stung replacement. Having my promotion stalled was one thing, but being spoken about as if I were already gone was another. Carla shot me a glance, her lips tight. She knew that challenging him in public only gave him more ground. For a moment, my mind flashed back to my first year at Bridgemont Strategies, 17 years ago, when a senior partner told me, "You've got the long game in, you don't let them rush you into playing small." I had believed hard work would speak for itself. Now, I wasn't so sure. When the meeting ended, Evan left without another word. Carla stayed gathering her notes until the hallway was empty. "They're easing you out," she said quietly. "Linda Farrow told me the promotion letter's still unsigned sitting in Evan's desk. He's waiting for you to walk." The promotion letter that was never signed had stopped feeling like a formality. Now, it was a reminder of how close recognition had been until someone decided I didn't deserve it. Later that afternoon, Derek Cole's name lit up my phone. I stepped into an empty conference room before answering. I heard about the promotion, Derek said. or the lack of one. Redwood could use someone who knows how to keep us from burning through budget and goodwill. It wasn't a formal offer, but it was the kind of suggestion that lodges in your mind. "I'm still here," I said. "Doesn't mean you have to stay," Derek replied. After the call, I stared at my reflection in the glass. Evan could block me here, but outside of Bridgemont, his reach ended. Still, the thought of leaving carried its own weight. 17 years is a long time to believe you're building something solid. That night, Carla and I met for coffee. She slid a folded paper across the table, an internal memo Evan had sent to Marcia Vance. In it, he claimed I'd failed to adapt to leadership expectations and that client retention remained stable despite limited direct engagement from Hale. I read it twice. The anger didn't spike, it settled. "He's rewriting your role," Carla said. "If that becomes the official record, it won't matter what you've actually done." Last time I saw this kind of quiet erasure, I let it slide. I told myself the truth would outlast the lie. But work without credit is just a quiet favor for someone else's resume. I folded the memo and slipped it into my bag. Not evidence yet, just a reminder that stories could be rewritten in both directions. By Friday, Linda Farrow called me into her office. She shut the door, her HR tone flat. "Jordan, the committee decided not to move forward with the promotion. At this time," she said, "you'll remain in your current role while we reevaluate leadership alignment next quarter." I looked at the unsigned promotion letter on her desk, edges curling. "How long has that been there?" Linda hesitated. "Since February. 3 months. 3 months of doing the work without the title. 3 months of Evan letting me carry the load while preparing my exit." I stood. "Thanks for the update, Linda." Walking back to my office, I thought about Derek's call about Carla's warning about the quiet stack of evidence in my bag. Evan believed the balance of power was fixed in his favor. He'd forgotten Redwood was still deciding where their next contract would land and who they trusted to manage it. I wasn't ready to walk, not yet. But I was done waiting for permission to protect what I'd built. I didn't need to fight back yet. I just needed them to remember who kept $12 million from slipping away. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been the one holding it all together while someone else took the credit. By the time I left that night, the unsigned promotion letter was still on Linda's desk. And for the first time, I didn't see it as a loss. I saw it as leverage. Evan Mercer stood in the doorway of my office like he was inspecting a crime scene. His eyes went straight to the navy blue folder on my desk, the one that held the promotion letter Linda Farrow had delivered weeks ago, still unsigned. "You've been busy?" he said, his tone somewhere between accusation and mockery. I didn't answer right away. The open blinds behind me let in the late afternoon light, casting a reflection of his silhouette onto my desk. It felt fitting his shadow had been hanging over my career for months. "I have," I said, finally. "And so has Redwood Dynamics." His jaw tightened. I could tell he'd heard something maybe from Carlin Guyon or someone else in the account team. That was the thing about Evan, he hated being the last to know. "I've seen some chatter," he said. "Derek Cole called you directly." I met his eyes. He called to ask if I'd consider helping him restructure their compliance process. Apparently they're not impressed with how Bridgemont's been handling their accounts since I was repositioned. It wasn't the whole truth Derek hadn't just asked. He'd offered an open door, a generous retainer, and the kind of freedom I hadn't had in years. But I wasn't going to give Evan the satisfaction of knowing he'd push me towards something better. Evan took a step into the office, lowering his voice. "You know that's a conflict of interest." I smiled, not kindly. "Only if I'm still here." For a moment, we just stood there. My hand rested on the edge of the promotion letter folder. I thought back to the day Linda slid it across my desk with a forced smile, telling me the review process was still ongoing. I'd known then what I know now. The decision had already been made, and I wasn't the one they wanted. "Don't be naive," Jordan Evans said. "You walk out with Redwood and you'll burn every bridge you've built here. You'll be done in this industry." I leaned back in my chair. Funny? I thought Redwood was part of this industry, and they're the ones asking for me. The air between us felt like it could snap. I could see it in his face. He wasn't just worried about losing a client. He was worried about losing control. And for someone like Evan Mercer, control was the only currency that mattered. Carla knocked lightly on the doorframe, breaking the tension. She glanced at Evan, then at me, reading the room in an instant. "Jordan, you've got a call holding on line 2. Derek says it's urgent." Evan's head snapped toward her. "I'll take it." Carla's smile was polite but cool. "He asked for Jordan." Evan shot me one last look before leaving. The sound of his shoes on the hallway tile faded, but the pressure in the room didn't. I picked up the phone. Derek's voice came through steady, but quick. It's moving faster than we thought. Redwood's board wants you on the project by next week. They're willing to match your current salary and add a performance bonus tied to savings. They also want to bring over Carla if she's interested. I glanced toward the doorway where Carla still stood. Her eyebrows lifted in silent question. Send me the details, I told Derek. I'll have an answer soon. When I hung up, Carla stepped inside, closing the door behind her. So, it's real. It's real, I said. She folded her arms. You know Evan's not going to let you walk out clean. He'll make it ugly. I nodded. That's why it has to be on my terms. I slid the promotion letter out of the navy blue folder. The paper was crisp, the Bridgemont letterhead centered perfectly at the top, but the signature line at the bottom was still empty. That blank space had become something more than a denial, it was proof. Proof that the promises here were never meant to be kept. Carla's eyes went to it. What are you going to do with that? Make sure it ends up in the right hands, I said. She didn't need me to explain. We both knew that in the right context, the letter would raise questions about delayed promotions, stalled client responses, and leadership that couldn't keep its own commitments. Questions that people like Marcia Vance, the CEO, wouldn't ignore once they reached her desk alongside a notice from a $12 million client. Carla took a breath. Then I'm in. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the letter in front of me. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. I thought about the years I'd given Bridgemont, the late nights, the business trips, the weekends lost to deadlines that no one remembered. And I thought about the moment Linda Farrow's voice had softened when she said, I'm sorry, Jordan. This just isn't the right time. The truth was, I didn't feel angry anymore. Not exactly. I felt clear, like the decision had already been made and I was just catching up to it. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The hallways were still quiet. I placed the navy blue folder in the center of my desk next to a sealed envelope addressed to Marcia Vance. Inside was the promotion letter, a detailed timeline of client requests ignored since my removal from Redwood's account, and a single sentence in my handwriting. This is why they're leaving. By the time Evan arrived, I was in the conference room with Carla, finalizing the transition notes for my replacement. He stopped in the doorway, scanning the scene like he was trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't have all the edges for. You think you won something here, he said quietly. I didn't look up from my notes. Not yet. And that was the truth. What I was setting in motion wasn't about winning a single moment. It was about shifting the ground under his feet until he realized it was gone. What Derek, Carla, and I did next would decide just how far that shift went. And by then, it would be too late for Evan Mercer to stop it. Evan Mercer's voice carried down the corridor before I even reached the elevator. $12 million a year, Marcia. Gone, just gone. The door to the executive wing was cracked open, and I caught the low-clipped reply from Marcia Vance. Not gone yet. We have 30 days to repitch. Don't make it worse. It was the first time I'd ever heard her sound unsure. In 17 years at Bridgemont Strategies, Marcia had always been the calm center in any storm. Now, the storm was coming from inside her own walls. That morning, Redwood Dynamics had sent a formal notice of disengagement, a 3-page PDF that was polite enough for public record, but unmistakable in its intent. Derek Cole's signature sat at the bottom, right above the timestamp 7:04 a.m. It cited a shift in strategic direction and alignment with alternative service providers. Industry speak for we're leaving, and you know exactly why. I'd been on the other side of those notices enough times to know how it would ripple. The loss wouldn't just be financial. Redwood had been Bridgemont's credibility anchor in every pitch deck for the last 5 years. Lose them, and suddenly every prospective client in the pipeline starts wondering what they know that we don't. I stepped into the lobby as Carla Nguyen emerged from a conference room, a folder clutched so tightly her knuckles were pale. She spotted me and hesitated. They're pulling every account manager into triage meetings, she said quietly. Evans, well, you can imagine. I said. You all right? She shrugged the kind of half motion that meant no, but we don't have time for that right now. It's strange seeing them scramble. Feels like watching a chess player realize they've been in check for 3 moves and only just noticed. I didn't need to stay long. I wasn't part of their recovery team anymore. but I lingered by the glass wall just long enough to see Evan pacing while Marcia stared at a printed copy of the Redwood notice. His gestures were sharp defensive. He was already in reaction mode. Later, in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, I slipped the navy blue leather folder from my bag. Inside the unsigned promotion letter sat where it always had, crisp and clean, the embossed Bridgemont Strategies letterhead catching the light. It wasn't bitterness that kept me carrying it. It was calibration, a reminder of what they thought I was worth and what they refused to give. From my seat, I could see the building's upper floors. No doubt someone from finance was already recalculating quarterly projections, factoring in the loss of Redwood's retainer. Paula Merrick, the HR director, who'd once told me, "Process takes precedence over personalities," would soon have to explain to her board why the personality they had undervalued had taken the process with them. My phone buzzed. A message from Derek. They just called to ask if we'd reconsider, told them we'd already signed with Harbor and Crane. I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not because I wanted to see anyone lose their job, but because Evan Mercer was finally learning that titles only matter if people choose to follow you. Carla texted an hour later. Evan's tearing through old proposals, trying to find something to send Redwood. Marcia pulled him into her office and shut the door. Whole floor's quiet. I pictured it, the hum of keyboards replaced by the weight of silence. In B2B consulting, silence in the middle of a workday is the sound of something breaking. The emails would start soon. Vendor holds, discretionary budget freezes, travel authorizations revoked. All the little measures a company takes when it's trying to make the books look healthier than they are. The irony was that none of it would address the real problem. Redwood hadn't left because of a single bad project or budget fight. They'd left because the person who built their trust had been told he was replaceable. By late afternoon, I walked past Bridgemont's building again. Through the front glass, I saw a courier handing Paula a thick envelope. She signed for it, then opened it right there at the reception desk. I couldn't see the contents, but I didn't need to. Some letters you can read by the way people hold them. In 17 years, I had watched Bridgemont survive economic downturns, client bankruptcies, even a lawsuit or two. But I had never seen the exact look I'd seen on Paula's face. Just then, the dawning recognition that the damage was not temporary. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I laid the promotion letter next to a printed copy of Redwood's disengagement notice. Same quality paper, same embossed letterhead. One was an offer they'd never signed. The other was a departure they couldn't stop. It struck me then that Evan probably hadn't made the connection yet, that the paper in his hand today was the consequence of the paper he'd refused to sign months ago. But he would. Everyone would. Carla's final text of the day came just before midnight. Tomorrow morning, Marcia's calling an all hands. Word is, she's bringing up client retention. You might want to keep an ear open. I typed back a simple reply. I will. I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag, and glanced once more toward the skyline. The lights on Bridgemont's top floor were still burning. That was Evan's way working late to look like he was in control, long after the real decisions had already been made. In truth, the decision had been made the moment they'd let that unsigned letter sit on Linda Farrow's desk, gathering dust. Everything after that was just a matter of timing, and now the timing was mine. I didn't need to dig through gossip to see Bridgemont cracking. The proof came in an email chain Derek Cole quietly forwarded me one Monday morning. Subject line, urgent. Redwood account at risk. I knew what at risk meant in corporate language. Somebody in the executive suite was sweating. Derek's message to me was only 5 words. Your timing was perfect, Jordan. From the forwarded chain, I pieced it together. Evan Mercer had tried to reassign Redwood Dynamics' scope to a different team after I left thinking the transition would look seamless. Except that new lead one of Evan's pet hires didn't understand Redwood's licensing renewal cycle. They'd missed a critical ETLA submission window. Now, Redwood was facing a compliance freeze on a product launch worth 7 figures. Paula Merrick, the operations director, had done her job. She flagged it to Evan early. But instead of fixing it, he'd buried her email. That's the kind of decision you make when your ego writes checks your skill set can't cash. Marcia Vance, our CEO, had been looped in only after Redwood's general counsel called her directly. By then, Derek had already secured me as a strategic consultant under Redwood's own banner. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same compliance expertise Evan dismissed as replaceable was now the only thing standing between Redwood and a failed quarter. From my side, the fix was straightforward. Get Redwood's documentation package resubmitted with ETLA under a special exemption clause I'd used in rare emergencies. The kind of clause you only know exists if you've lived in the weeds of these filings for years. I had. From Redwood's side, it wasn't just about saving the launch. It was about leverage. They now had a reason to question every other Bridgemont deliverable. One client with that much revenue weight could force board-level conversations. Derek understood the politics. He was already laying groundwork for Redwood to demand a contract renegotiation and to make my name part of the terms. The symbolic letter, the promotion. Letter that was never signed sat on my desk through all of this. Some days I looked at it and thought about shredding it. Other days I kept it in view as a reminder this was never about a title. It was about forcing Evan and maybe even Marcia to admit in board minutes what they'd never admit to my face, that I'd been essential. I didn't play it like a vendetta in my communications with Redwood. Every email was clinical, precise jargon, only when necessary, and always footnoted with a plain English translation. I wanted their in-house counsel to see I could bridge technical and executive language, something Bridgemont had consistently failed to do without me. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a live demonstration. Carla Nguyen called me one evening after hours, her voice low. "You didn't hear this from me, but HR's in meltdown. Linda Farrow's been asked to pull your file again." I knew what that meant. Evan was scrambling for a narrative to explain to Marcia why Redwood was leaning so hard on him. They'd try to paint my departure as mutual, amicable, maybe even pre-planned. But my own exit email to the leadership team had been deliberately bland. No accusations, no drama, just enough ambiguity to make them fill in the blanks and make every guess sound self-serving. Inside Bridgemont, the cracks widened. Paula's team had to cover not just Redwood's account, but 3 others affected by the same procedural gaps. With her resources stretched, small failures started stacking up: missed milestones, delayed reports, minor penalties from regulatory bodies. Individually, they were annoyances. Together, they painted a picture of operational incompetence, and every one of them traced back to gaps I used to cover without being asked. I made sure Derek had the full narrative, not as a rant, but as a factual time-stamped sequence. Here's what was missed. Here's the consequence. Here's the fix I implemented under Redwood. He didn't need to embellish when he brought it up in joint calls with Bridgemont's execs. All he had to do was pause and let the silence hang after saying Jordan already resolved this on our side. The real shift came when Marcia Vance herself joined one of those calls. She didn't say much, but her tone was clipped. I'd worked with her enough to recognize when she was processing the cost-benefit math. Retaining Evan's pride versus retaining Redwood's $12 million annual contract. One was a sunk cost. The other was a lifeline in a tightening market. That night I took the unsigned promotion letter and slid it into a folder with my current Redwood consulting agreement. It wasn't revenge porn. It was evidence. Proof that they'd had the chance to formalize my role, and that by failing to do so, they'd handed me to their top client on a silver platter. What I really wanted, and what I was starting to get, wasn't just to see Evan sweat. It was to make Bridgemont's board put in writing that losing me had a measurable financial cost. That's the kind of acknowledgement you can't erase from corporate history. Titles get reassigned, board minutes get archived forever. By the end of the week, Derek confirmed the rumor Redwood had submitted a formal request to Bridgemont that all future strategic oversight for their account be coordinated through or in direct consultation with Jordan Hale. No one used the word exclusive, but in practice that's what it was. I'd become the gate they had to walk through. The next move would be delicate. I couldn't overplay it and look like I was orchestrating Redwood's demands. But I also couldn't let Evan rebuild a narrative where he somehow saved the relationship. That's where patience came in, and where the final turn of the knife would have to wait just a little longer. I ended that week knowing one thing with absolute clarity: they could try to rewrite the story inside Bridgemont all they wanted. The only version that mattered was already being lived in Redwood's boardroom in their contract terms and in every missed deliverable piling up under Evan's watch. And I wasn't done yet. The formal request from Redwood was only the opening move. What came next would force Bridgemont's CEO to make a choice she'd been avoiding for years, and this time she couldn't dodge it. Marcia Vance didn't waste words. The subject line in her email simply read, "Urgent Redwood Dynamics Contract Continuity." I'd seen her name in my inbox maybe 3 times in 17 years, each tied to a situation where millions were on the line. I clicked it open, scanning past the pleasantries. The meat was in the third paragraph. Redwood had sent a formal addendum to their service agreement. Effective immediately, their account would remain with Bridgemont Strategies on the explicit condition that I was the designated lead strategist by name in the contract. Any reassignment would be considered a breach of terms. It was a move straight out of Derek Cole's playbook, a clause that looked simple on the page, but shifted the entire balance of power. No one at Bridgemont could touch the Redwood account without coming through me. I sat back in my chair, the unsigned promotion letter still on my desk where I'd left it weeks ago. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper, thinking about the way Linda Farrow had slid it toward me that morning, her voice carefully neutral. Pending final review, she'd said. Pending meant Evan Mercer's signature, and Mercer had made sure it never came. Now, Mercer didn't get a vote. The beauty of Redwood's clause was in the structure. It didn't promote me, it didn't even change my title. But, in practical terms, it locked me into a role that was more secure and more valuable than any internal promotion could offer. If Bridgemont wanted Redwood's $12 million a year, I was the price of admission. Carlin Nguyen pinged me on Slack 30 minutes later. You seeing the all-hands at 4 Mercer looks like he's swallowed a stapler. By the time the meeting started, the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Mercer stood at the head of the conference table, reading from a prepared statement about honoring client preferences and ensuring continuity of service. His voice caught just for a second when he said my name. This adjustment, he continued, will allow us to maintain our long-standing relationship with Redwood Dynamics while we reassess internal resource allocations. I watched his jaw tighten. He knew exactly what this meant. Resource allocations was corporate shorthand for moving pieces on a board. But now, one of those pieces, me, was glued in place. After the meeting, I stepped into the hallway. Marcia was there, flanked by 2 members of the board. She gave me the kind of look that wasn't warm but wasn't hostile either. It was the look of someone recognizing leverage when they saw it. Jordan, she said, this arrangement isn't ideal, but Redwood has been clear. I trust you'll keep them happy. Her tone carried a subtext. Don't make me regret this. I will, I said, but they're not asking for happy. They're asking for results. She didn't disagree. Back at my desk, I forwarded the Redwood clause to Carla. She replied with a single line, "This is checkmate, isn't it?" "Not yet," I typed back. But the board just lost their queen. I wasn't here to humiliate Mercer. That would have been too easy and too temporary. What I wanted was permanence. A paper trail. Something they couldn't erase in a performance review or bury under a reorg memo. And now I had it. My name in black ink on a contract Bridgemont couldn't afford to lose. That afternoon, Mercer called me into his office. He tried for casual leaning back in his chair, but the stack of printed emails on his desk told another story. So, he began, "Looks like Redwood values your contributions." "They always have," I said. He let that hang in the air for a beat. "Let's make sure we don't give them a reason to reconsider." I thought of the unsigned promotion letter again, still sitting in my drawer. "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what I've been saying for years." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he pivoted to logistics timelines, deliverables, client touchpoints, all the things I'd been managing without his interference for months. When I left his office, Carla was waiting by the coffee machine. How bad, she asked. "He's adjusting," I said. She grinned. "Adjusting looks good on him." That evening I stayed late not because I had to, but because I wanted the quiet. I pulled out the promotion letter again, laid it flat on the desk, and set the Redwood clause beside it. One was a promise they'd never intended to keep. The other was a condition they had no choice but to honor. The difference was leverage. In the world, Bridgemont lived in titles were ornamental, contracts were structural, and Redwood had just built me into the foundation. I slipped the promotion letter back into its envelope and put it in my drawer. Not as a reminder of what I didn't get, but as a record of how the game had really been won. The real win wasn't the clause itself. It was the fact that Mercer now had to plan every move around it. I didn't need to be in his meetings to influence his decisions. My presence was in the paperwork and the signatures, in the binding terms he couldn't rewrite. For the first time in months, I felt the pace of my breathing slow, not from relief, but from control. The kind that doesn't need to be announced because it's written into the rules everyone else has to follow. Redwood's next quarterly review was in 6 weeks. Between now and then, there would be calls, strategy sessions, quiet moments where Mercer would look across the table and know he was operating on my terms. And when that review came, I planned to make sure the balance shifted even further. Because the clause wasn't my endgame, it was my opening move for the final play. By the close of the second quarter, Bridgemont Strategies didn't feel like the same company, and neither did I. Evan Mercer no longer walked the glass hallway with the same unshakable authority. His calendar used to be a wall of client development blocks. Now it was cluttered with internal restructuring meetings. The edge in his voice was gone, replaced with careful phrasing that avoided inviting questions he couldn't answer. The Redwood Dynamics accounts, once his primary bargaining chip, were firmly in my hands. Derek Cole and I had a standing Tuesday call each week, tightening the bond between Redwood and me, personally, not just the Bridgemont name on the invoice. Evan wasn't the face Redwood wanted in the room anymore. Inside the company, Carla Nguyen began pulling me into strategic meetings without running it through Evan. Officially, she called it streamlining. In reality, she was rerouting influence. During our quarterly review, Marcia Vance didn't look to Evan when Redwood came up. She looked to me and said, "Jordan, your turn." It was subtle but unmistakable. I didn't celebrate out loud. Leverage is never about noise. It's about securing ground so no one can take it back. My leverage lived in contracts. Derek and I had fine-tuned clauses that kept project ownership locked in my name as lead strategist. Evan could circle, but he couldn't get inside. He tried anyway. He dropped into calls, shadowed planning sessions, but clients bypassed him. They asked for updates from me, directly referencing details I'd shared weeks earlier. The man who once told me I wasn't ready was now orbiting meetings where I set the agenda. In my desk drawer, the navy blue folder stayed where I'd put it months ago, the one holding the promotion letter that was never signed. It used to feel like a wound. Now it was a quiet reminder that a title wasn't the gatekeeper to power. Evan's decline wasn't public. No scandal, no firing, just erosion. The board shifted him into emerging markets, a role with fewer clients and more cold leads. No one called it a demotion, but when his name disappeared from Redwood's CRM record, I knew the shift was permanent. Some of it was deliberate on my part. Some of it was gravity. My team's numbers stayed solid while Evan's project stumbled. Carla proposed cross-departmental integration, which was just a polite way of redistributing his authority without making it a headline. The ripple effect was obvious. New hires came to me for guidance before approaching their supervisors. Redwood invited me, not Bridgemont, to co-present at their annual retreat. Even Linda Farrow, the HR manager who'd handed me that unsigned letter, began pulling me into talent planning talks. Occasionally, I'd catch Evan watching me from his doorway. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was recognition, an unspoken admission that I had built something he couldn't dismantle. This was no longer about a promotion. It was about the fact that he needed me more than I needed him. One Friday evening long after most had left, I stayed to finish a proposal. The office was quiet, the city's hum low against the glass. I opened the navy blue folder. The letter inside still read like an HR script. "We recognize your contributions. The timing isn't right." I felt no anger, just clarity. That paper had been a ceiling once. Now it was a relic. The permanence of my position became clear during a call with Derek. We were locking in a multi-year expansion contract, 5 years of guaranteed work with clauses written to ensure leadership continuity. "Keeps the right person in the right chair," Derek said. It wasn't about titles now. It was about influence that couldn't be removed without risking the entire relationship. Influence that no signature could grant and none could take away. Evan wasn't gone. He was just out of my way. The structures were set, the alliances were secure. Even if he tried to maneuver back, he'd find the ground already claimed. A week before the fall board meeting, Marcia called me into her office. She didn't offer the promotion. She didn't have to. "Keep doing what you're doing with Redwood," she said. "We can't afford to lose that momentum." That sentence held more weight than any letter Linda could have handed me. I walked out without the folder. I didn't need to carry it anymore. My legacy wasn't on paper. It was in the system I had built around me, one that could outlast any single decision. By December, I'd stopped checking whether Evan was copied on invites. Not because I didn't care, because it didn't matter. The promotion they once held over me had lost its leverage. The path I'd carved was mine alone, and no one could block it now. And still, I kept the letter in the drawer, not as a trophy, as a compass. A reminder of where I'd been and why I'd never again let someone else decide my worth. What remained was not about victory, it was about making sure the win could never be undone. And one final step stood between me and closure. Under the dim light of my office long after the rest of Bridgemont had gone quiet, I sat with the navy blue client ledger open in front of me, the same one that once held the unsigned promotion letter tucked between neat columns of revenue figures and client notes. Back then it was proof of a future I'd been promised. Now it was a record of how every decision Evan Mercer made to sideline me became the first crack in the floor beneath him. The board's statement had gone public that morning. Evan was stepping down effective immediately. Linda Farrow's name appeared in the same paragraph, though her exit was mutually agreed upon. The press release was worded carefully, but everyone in our industry knew what pending compliance review meant. Carla Nguyen told me over lunch that 3 of Bridgemont's longest-standing clients had already shifted contracts to Redwood Dynamics. She didn't have to say why I'd seen the transition agreements Derek Cole handed me weeks earlier. Redwood didn't hire me for revenge. They hired me because I was the one person who could manage their $12 million portfolio without the constant brushfires Bridgemont had been starting in recent months. But in quiet moments, I couldn't ignore how neatly the pieces had fallen into place. All I'd had to do was keep working, keep delivering, and let Evan's shortcuts show themselves. The ETLA audit report landed on my desk the same day I cleared out my old office. I hadn't seen it yet, but I didn't need to. The ripple effect was already in motion. When a licensing body finds irregularities in high-value contracts, they don't just fine you. They start asking who approved what, who signed which document, and who forgot to send mandatory disclosures. Evan had built his career on cutting through red tape. The problem was, he never cared whether that tape was legally required. I thought back to the moment Linda handed me the promotion letter without a signature, her eyes flicking toward the closed conference room where Evan was holding court. She'd said the review process was on pause. I'd said nothing, but the weight of that paper in my hand told me more than her words ever could. That was the moment I decided the ledger would become more than a record. It would become a map of clients I could protect, relationships I could preserve, and bridges I was willing to burn if the wind changed direction. When Evan's resignation hit the news, some of my old colleagues messaged me. A few congratulated me outright, assuming I'd had a hand in it. Others just sent neutral notes, polite but guarded the way people talk when they're not sure which side of a story you're on. I replied to each one with the same line: I'm exactly where I need to be. It was the truth. Bridgemont would survive in some form. Companies that size always do. They'd bring in a crisis CEO, cut some departments, maybe settle with ETLA quietly. But the version of Bridgemont I'd given 17 years to, the one that valued precision relationships and earned trust, was gone long before I left. Paula Merrick called me the night before the statement went out. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She only said, "You did what you had to do. I hope you can leave it there." I wanted to tell her that leaving it there was exactly the plan. My aim was never to ruin Evan for the sake of it. I just needed to make sure he couldn't keep turning my work and the work of people like Carla into collateral damage for his next shortcut. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something I hadn't expected. The ledger, once a symbol of everything I hadn't been given, started to lose its weight. The pages no longer felt like a reminder of loss, they read, like a record of what I'd carried forward. Clients whose accounts I'd kept clean, projects I'd brought in under budget, partnerships I'd preserved even when the company above me was crumbling. One afternoon, I closed the ledger for the last time and slid it into a drawer at home, not the office home, somewhere it wouldn't be pulled out in meetings or passed around as a reference. It had served its purpose. Whatever came next didn't need a paper trail to prove it happened. Looking back, I realized the real motive was never about that promotion. It wasn't even about the title, the office, or the pay bump. It was about refusing to let someone else write the ending to my 17 years without earning it. Evan thought I'd disappear quietly. Instead, I built something stronger in plain sight and let him write his own exit. The cost. Time. I'll never get back. Bridges I'll never rebuild. People who will always see me as the one who let it happen, even if they never knew the details. But the gain is one I can live with, knowing the clients and colleagues who mattered are in a place where their work won't be used against them. Some nights I wonder what Evan tells himself now. Does he believe he was unlucky betrayed? Or does he ever think back to that unsigned letter and see the moment he handed me all the leverage I'd need? The ledger is still in my desk, though I haven't opened it since. Not because I need it, but because it reminds me of one quiet truth. Sometimes the best move isn't to strike fast. It's to let the other person make the last fatal move for you. Share your own experiences. Like and subscribe for more stories.